February 25, 1986, 10:30 a.m. Two women stood at opposite ends of Manila, representing everything the other despised. In Malacañang Palace, Imelda Marcos sat in her private salon, surrounded by 3,000 pairs of shoes, priceless art collections, and the trappings of absolute power. She was still the most beautiful woman in Philippine politics, still commanding attention with every entrance, still believing that glamour and grace could overcome any opposition. 12 miles away, Cory Aquino knelt in prayer at a simple chapel in Quezon City. She wore a plain yellow dress that cost less than one of Imelda's earrings. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer accessories. Just a 53-year-old widow who had never wanted political power but had become the symbol of everything Imelda Marcos was not. In 6 hours, one of these women would be fleeing the country in disgrace. The other would become the president of the Philippines. But this wasn't just about politics. This was about two completely different ideas of what it meant to be a powerful woman. The beauty queen who had everything versus the housewife who wanted nothing. And in the end, the housewife would destroy the queen not through force or wealth or cunning, but through something far more dangerous, moral authority. This is the story of how Cory Aquino defeated Imelda Marcos by refusing to become like her. To understand how devastating this confrontation was for Imelda Marcos, you need to understand what she had built her entire identity around. Since becoming First Lady in 1965, Imelda had revolutionized the role of political wives in Asia. She wasn't just Ferdinand's supporter, she was his partner in power, his cultural ambassador, his demonstration that the Philippines could produce women as sophisticated as any in the world. Imelda Marcos had turned being beautiful into a political strategy. When she traveled to foreign capitals, world leaders remembered meeting her long after they forgot what Ferdinand had said. When she opened cultural centers and hotels, she made development look glamorous. When she spoke at international conferences, she made authoritarianism seem elegant. Most importantly, Imelda had convinced millions of Filipinos that she represented their aspirations. Poor women looked at her designer gowns and saw what success looked like. Working mothers looked at her international recognition and felt proud of their country. Even critics acknowledged that she had given the Philippines a global profile it had never had before. By 1985, Imelda Marcos was more than just the First Lady. She was a brand, the iron butterfly who combined feminine grace with political steel, the former beauty queen who had become one of the most powerful women in the world. And then came Cory Aquino, who represented everything that Imelda was not. Where Imelda was glamorous, Cory was plain. Where Imelda commanded attention, Cory sought privacy. Where Imelda spoke of grand visions, Cory spoke of simple values. Where Imelda had built her power through marriage to a powerful man, Cory had gained her authority through widowhood from a murdered husband. Most dangerously for Imelda, Cory Aquino represented an alternative definition of powerful womanhood that made Imelda's version look shallow and corrupt. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Imelda owned palaces in multiple countries while Cory lived in the same modest house she had shared with Ninoy. Imelda collected priceless art while Cory read devotional books. Imelda threw parties for international celebrities while Cory attended daily mass with ordinary parishioners. But what made Cory truly dangerous to Imelda wasn't her simplicity, it was her authenticity. Everything about Imelda Marcos was carefully constructed for political effect. Everything about Cory Aquino seemed genuine and unstudied. When Cory spoke about her husband's assassination, people saw real grief. When Imelda spoke about Ferdinand's leadership, people saw political calculation. When Cory talked about restoring democracy, people heard moral conviction. When Imelda talked about national development, people heard empty slogans. The battle between them began even before they faced each other directly. After Ninoy's assassination in 1983, Cory became the focal point for opposition to the Marcos regime, not because she sought that role, but because her suffering gave her credibility that professional politicians couldn't match. Imelda understood the threat immediately. This wasn't just another opposition leader who could be discredited or co-opted. Cory Aquino's power came from her victimhood, her moral authority, her refusal to engage in the kinds of political games that Imelda had mastered. Even worse, Cory represented everything that Imelda's critics said she should have been, a woman who supported her husband without losing her own identity, who cared about ordinary Filipinos without condescending to them, who exercised power without being corrupted by it. The first direct confrontation came during the 1986 election campaign. While Ferdinand debated policy, Imelda and Cory competed for the souls of Filipino women. Imelda offered sophistication, progress, and international recognition. Cory offered honesty, humility, and moral leadership. Imelda's campaign events were spectacular productions. Designer gowns, orchestrated crowds, celebrity endorsements, elaborate staging. She spoke from elevated platforms to audiences who had been carefully selected and coached. Everything was perfect, polished, professionally managed. Cory's campaign events looked like church services. Simple venues, spontaneous crowds, amateur organization, heartfelt testimonials. She spoke from ground level to audiences who had come because they wanted to, not because they were paid to attend. Everything was authentic, emotional, unpredictably powerful. The contrast was devastating for Imelda because it made her look fake by comparison. The more elaborate her events became, the more artificial they seemed next to Cory's simplicity. The more she emphasized her achievements, the more self-serving they appeared next to Cory's self-sacrifice. But the real confrontation came after the election, when Ferdinand Marcos tried to steal victory from Cory Aquino through massive fraud. This was where the fundamental difference between the two women became most apparent. When the fraud became undeniable, Imelda's response was to defend it through more elaborate lies. She held press conferences claiming that the opposition was funded by communists. She organized rallies featuring paid supporters denouncing Cory as a puppet of foreign interests. She used her international connections to convince foreign leaders that the election had been legitimate. Cory's response was to pray. Literally. While Imelda was orchestrating a propaganda campaign, Cory was attending Mass and asking God for guidance. While Imelda was making deals with military commanders, Cory was relying on the Filipino people's sense of justice. The climax came during the 4 days of people power, when 2 million Filipinos surrounded the rebels at Camp Crame and demanded that Ferdinand Marcos step down. This was the moment when Imelda Marcos and Cory Aquino finally faced each other directly, not in a debate or an interview, but through their competing visions of Philippine society. Imelda spent those 4 days trying to save the regime through traditional power politics. She called world leaders asking for support. She negotiated with military commanders seeking loyalty. She prepared escape plans involving family wealth hidden in foreign accounts. Everything she did was based on the assumption that power came from connections, money, and strategic alliances. Cory spent those 4 days doing what she had always done, praying, attending Mass, and trusting that the Filipino people would choose correctly. She made no deals with generals, no promises to cronies, no appeals to foreign governments. Her power came from moral authority, not political maneuvering. The contrast was visible to everyone. Television cameras showed Imelda in designer outfits making desperate phone calls from a palace that looked more like a museum than a home. The same cameras showed Cory in simple clothes, praying with ordinary Filipinos on the streets of Manila. One woman was trying to hold on to power through manipulation and corruption. The other was offering power through service and sacrifice. One represented the old Philippines of privilege and exploitation. The other represented a new Philippines of democracy and dignity. By February 25th, the choice was clear to everyone except Imelda Marcos herself. Even as crowds surrounded the palace demanding their resignation, Imelda continued to believe that she could win through superior tactics and international intervention. She organized a counter-rally featuring government employees who had been ordered to attend. She prepared a speech claiming that the opposition was orchestrated by communist agitators and American imperialists. But when she looked out the palace windows and saw 2 million Filipinos celebrating in the streets, Imelda finally understood what she was facing. This wasn't a political opposition that could be defeated through better strategy. This was a moral revolution that had made her way of exercising power obsolete. The final moment came when Ferdinand told her they had to leave. Imelda's response was revealing, "But where will we go? Everything we have is here." She was right. Everything they had was in the Philippines. The palaces, the art collections, the business empires, the political networks, all of it was tied to their control of the Philippine state. Without presidential power, they were just exiles with stolen money. Cory Aquino, by contrast, had never built her identity around material possessions or political control. When she became president, she continued living in the same house, attending the same church, maintaining the same simple lifestyle that had given her moral authority in the first place. The irony was perfect. Imelda Marcos, who had spent 20 years accumulating the trappings of power, lost everything when power abandoned her. Cory Aquino, who had never sought power for its own sake, gained everything by proving she didn't need it to be effective. But the deeper victory belonged to Cory's vision of womanhood. For 20 years Imelda had demonstrated that women could be powerful by becoming more like men, more ruthless, more acquisitive, more willing to use violence and corruption to achieve their goals. Cory proved that women could be powerful by remaining true to traditionally feminine values: compassion, humility, service, moral clarity. She showed that strength didn't require hardness, that leadership didn't require domination, that power didn't require corruption. The beauty queen who had everything lost to the housewife who wanted nothing. The sophisticated international celebrity was defeated by the woman who preferred to be anonymous. The iron butterfly was brought down by someone her supporters called just a housewife. But just a housewife turned out to be exactly what the Philippines needed. Someone who understood that political power should serve families, not exploit them. Someone who knew that real strength came from moral conviction, not material accumulation. Someone who proved that the most powerful thing any person could do was to remain incorruptibly themselves. Today, Imelda Marcos is remembered as a cautionary tale about the corrupting effects of absolute power. Her shoes, her jewelry, her palaces have become symbols of everything that was wrong with the dictatorship. Cory Aquino is remembered as the woman who restored democracy to the Philippines through the simple expedient of refusing to be corrupted by the democratic process. Her yellow dresses, her prayer books, her modest lifestyle became symbols of what was possible when political power served moral purpose. The contest between them wasn't really about politics or gender or even power. It was about two fundamentally different ideas of what it meant to be human. One believed that people should use their positions to accumulate as much as possible for themselves. The other believed that people should use their positions to serve something larger than themselves. February 25, 1986. The beauty queen who had spent 20 years becoming the most powerful woman in Asia was destroyed by a housewife who had spent 53 years learning how to serve others. It wasn't even close. In the end, moral authority defeated material power so completely that it looked effortless. The woman who had everything lost to the woman who wanted nothing. And in losing, she proved that Cory Aquino had been right all along about what really mattered. The final lesson of their confrontation wasn't about women's roles or political strategy or even democracy. It was about the difference between taking power and deserving power. Imelda had taken power through marriage, accumulated more power through corruption, and lost power through moral bankruptcy. Cory had earned power through suffering, exercised power through service, and kept power by never really wanting it for its own sake. The beauty queen versus the housewife. In the end, beauty wasn't enough. Character was everything.